When Miss Baldwin first asked me to do a TED Talk, I immediately said yes. And then I immediately had a panic because TED Talks are about ideas worth spreading. And I'm not really sure that I've had any of those yet. I'm a filmmaker, and in script writing, there's an old adage that we sometimes throw around, and that's that you write what you know. And so tonight, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about a subject that I'm intimately familiar with, and that's failure. I find failure to be an interesting phenomenon. We live our lives in fear of it. The shame and the embarrassment that comes along with failure is enough that we'll impose mediocrity on ourselves because the risk of failure is much lower when we don't attempt anything great. But at the same time, I think we'd all agree that the greatest thinkers and doers of our time didn't just start out that way. They tried and they failed a lot on their road to success. So we hold these two ideas of failure in our minds at the same time. One, that we need failure in order to be great, but the other, that we want to avoid failure at all costs. So tonight I'd like to talk to you about failure, and I'd like to talk to you about my failures, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why we've all been thinking about failure the wrong way. Now, for the first 18 years of our lives, we're generally pretty well sheltered from significant failure, but as soon as I had the opportunity, I started messing things up for myself in a pretty huge way. After graduating Arlee High School, I set out on what would eventually become a 7-year tour de force in failure. In 2006, I enrolled at the University of Montana as a physics and engineering major. And right off the bat, failure was the name of the game. I failed to adjust to college life. I failed to understand the new responsibilities that I had, and most of all, I failed to even go to class. And as a result, this is my transcript from my first semester in college. Now, there's some high school students here tonight who are going to be going to college in the fall, and so for you guys, I have a couple pieces of advice. If over the next 4 years of your life, at any point you find that your cumulative GPA has dropped below your mean blood alcohol content, then one way or another you're failing. And my second piece of advice for you is that other than this moment right now, you should never take advice from someone with grades like this. This semester was a formative experience for me. My family spent a lot of time and a lot of money to afford me the opportunity to go to college, and I squandered that in a huge way. I know that this is not who I am. Or maybe this is who I am, but this is not the person that I want to be. So I knew that I needed to get better. And I did get better, but just not immediately. Now, academics were not the only way that I failed during this time of my life. Poor judgment and a general lack of character sort of followed me through my mid and early 20s. I'd tell you some stories that illustrate that point, but most of them aren't really appropriate for the TED stage. And I don't really want to bore you with too much of my own vanity, so I'll just give you the condensed version of the next 8 years of my life. I continued to fail at most things. Eventually, I realized that I was never going to be a good engineer because I hate engineering. So I decided that I would focus on a more attainable goal of becoming an internationally renowned and world-famous filmmaker. So I dropped out of college. I moved to Los Angeles, and I found some work in television and film, until eventually I found myself on the set of Nickelodeon's iCarly, and I realized once again it was time to make a change. So I moved back to Montana, I got into film school, and eventually I graduated. And so there I was, 25, with a mountain of student loan debt and a useless art degree. And I sort of thought to myself that if I didn't now go out and do something with this experience and this knowledge, that it was all going to be a waste. So myself, along with an incredibly talented partner I met somewhere along the way, we decided that we were going to make a feature film. When I decided tonight that I wanted to talk about failure, I knew that I wanted to expand my horizons. beyond my own experiences. I wanted to explore the question of what is constant and repetitive failure doing to us behaviorally. And so I did some reading and some research, and there's surprisingly little out there on the subject, but I did find one study that I'll share with you tonight because I think it illustrates the point that I'm trying to make pretty well. The study is called Effects of Failure on Subsequent Performance, and as I'm sure you can tell, that even the pictures in this thing are like super boring, so I'll just give you the Cliff's Notes of it. Basically, these two researchers got a bunch of students together, and they ran the students through a bunch of situations, and there were multiple choice answers for how each student could respond to the situation. So for instance, a little girl is admitted at the children's ward of your hospital. During the examination, she's extremely scared, she cries, so much that you cannot make a diagnosis. How would you respond to this situation? So the students would go through a bunch of questions like this, and they would pick what they thought was the best answer. But the question and answer section of the study was just a red herring, because regardless of how the students responded to these questions, they were separated into one of two groups. The first group was given no feedback on how they responded to the questions, but the second group was given predominantly negative feedback. Essentially, after each time one of these kids in the second group would answer one of these questions, the researchers would say, like, that was a terrible decision. And what the researchers found was that the students who were given primarily negative feedback went on to have a higher rate of motivation and a higher rate of success on subsequent test tasks. Basically, because these students were told they failed and they believed that they were failing, they were more motivated to work harder to succeed. So we decided to make a film. Now, up to this point, I'd never even really made a student film. True to my nature, I kind of skirted through film school by just kind of sprinkling my term papers with fancy French phrases like cinema verite and mise en scène and the dialectic. And I don't think that one's French, but I don't speak French, so I don't know. But a feature film is a whole different ballgame. What we've come to find out is that the whole process is fraught with the potential for failure. But Jordan, my partner, wrote a script. We spent months working it into a workable screenplay. We somehow convinced our friends and families to front up the cash so that we could make it. We hired a cast and crew of over 50 people. We locked down locations, we organized wardrobes. We drove across the country and back in 8 days, and we shot a movie somewhere in between the driving. We even innovated a whole new camera system that would help us bring our vision to the screen. And after all that hard work and all that time, we still cannot escape failure. This is the image that came off our camera on the first night of shooting. And if you're looking at this and you think, that looks a little stretched and the color's a little weird, it's kind of ugly, it's because all those things are true. To me, this was, once again, that first semester report card. I know that I can be better than this. I know that I want to be better than this. And I know that I needed to be better than this. And so I got better than this. But this time, I had to get better immediately. That first night of shooting taught me more than I learned in 3 years of film school. And I'll tell you why. TED Talks are about ideas worth spreading. And when we started a few minutes ago, I told you that I'd never really had one of those, but since then I've had one, so I'll share it with you. We like to hold on to our successes, and we like to hold them close, and we like to believe that our hard work is what makes us successful. And at the same time, we like to externalize our failures and believe that some outside forces are what cause us to fail. But I don't think that that's the way things are. I know that I never could have gotten to the point where I was capable of producing a feature film without the failures that preceded it. The failure was essential to my success. The study that I told you about is evidence of it. My story is evidence of it. And I think if you think about your own experiences, you can relate to some of what I'm talking about tonight. Failure is essential to our success. Failure is the foundation that we build our success upon. Failure is intrinsic in success, and in fact, failure is success. Failure is success. That's what I wanted my TED idea to be. I want that to be my TED idea because that is a super awesome TED idea. Failure is success is like this nice little phrase that's like a little counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it like kind of makes sense a little bit. But what's better than that is that the implication is that our failures aren't really failures at all. That our failures are just little failure caterpillar that one day are going to blossom into beautiful success butterflies. Now, I hope you realize, like I did, that that idea is ridiculous. Failure is not success. Failure is ugly, and failure can be dangerous. And failure reveals deep inadequacies in ourselves that I think we'd rather not look at. And so, if failure is not success, then what was the point of the last 10 minutes? Well, I didn't really tell you the whole story. So the students in that study weren't chosen at random. They were all pre-med students. And the questions they were asked also weren't chosen at random. They came in two categories. The first being questions of little or no relevance to the medical profession, but the second category was questions of a high degree of relevance to the medical profession. Now, being pre-med students, all of the participants in the study identified themselves strongly as medical professionals. And what the researchers found was that students who were given negative feedback on questions that had a high degree of relevance in the medical profession went on to be more motivated and were more likely to succeed at later test tasks. What the research suggested was what I've found in my own life, and that failure can be a positive for us, but it can only be that if we truly want to excel at the things we do. I'll grant you that that's not as sexy of an idea as failure is success, but I think that it's actually a better one because it means that we have the ability to see failure in a different way. We have the ability to build our successes on the foundation of our failures. We also have to be willing to do the work to shed our apathies and our complacencies and be willing to risk failure knowing that it's probably inevitable, but that it's also necessary, and that in the end, our want is what will foster our success. Now, my film, this thing that I spent 2.5 years of my life on, in the last month has been rejected from the first 2 film festivals that we submitted to. Top-tier A-list film festivals said you failed. And they might be right. But either way, I can't wait to share the fruits of my failure with you guys because what I really, really want is to tell you a great story. And I know now what I need to get there. Thank you.